The prince swore he would never kiss a servant, but she was the one who stole his very first kiss. Before we begin this beautiful period romance story, tell me in the comments where you're listening from. I love knowing where you're joining me from. The chandeliers sang with light and 1,000 reflections of the same smile. Gold trimmed every edge. Music ran like a river through the hall, and the river had a direction. Toward him. He felt it even before the circle formed, light as lace and twice as binding. They wanted a jest. They wanted a vow dressed as wit. They wanted his heart tied neatly to the crown in a sentence that left no air for rumour to breathe. The Duke at his elbow lifted a glass. The young ladies fluttered their fans like birds testing wind. Henri lifted his chin to the right height. He had been taught that height. He let his mouth curve. The mask was a polished thing. It never slipped. He gave them the shape they wanted. "Love," he said, in a voice that touched every ear and none of the room's deep corners, "is a word for poets and treaties, not for a prince's hours. And as for kisses," he paused just enough to season it, "a crown kisses no apron." The laughter came in little ribbons, it tied around his lungs. A few men clapped their gloves softly against sleeves. A cluster of ladies tilted their heads in a practiced show of amusement, and the edge of one fan traced the air, as if writing his sentence on the space between them. It was all in good cheer. No one in that circle believed that cheer alone could carry a court. Cheer needed rules. Rules needed display. He had performed the display. He had performed it well. The Duc d'Artois, a fraction behind his left shoulder, murmured without moving his lips, "Gracefully done, Your Highness." Henri's smile held. It was simple to hold. He had carried heavier cups than this. He sipped wine, tasted nothing, and returned the glass to a footman whose white gloves never creased. The music pressed forward into another dance. A new line formed. The young ladies looked lovely in a way that was arranged rather than born. Each glance he met was carefully set like a stone in a ring. He had said similar things before. He would say them again. It was what the court required of him. Our prince's mouth, like a seal, had a proper use. He had not meant to notice the momentary hush after the laughter. It was a small hole in the curtain of sound. He saw it in the lift of a lady's eyebrow, in the way two gentlemen exchanged a glance and then looked away. He felt it in his throat. It was a pressure asking to be ignored. It would be ignored. He nodded to the next person, and the dance reformed around him. He did not remember the face of the last partner who curtsied before him. He had thanked her. He had said something about the music. He had added a compliment that landed with the right softness. He had eased away, step by step, toward a door that a servant had opened at the precise inch of space that allowed for a prince's clean exit. He stepped into a corridor with lower ceilings and fewer echoes. Air drifted there that did not taste of perfume. He moved down a stair that knew feet happier than his, past a guard whose back was straighter than any column, past another door and then another, each one closing the sound of the hall behind him like cards laid face down. He did not run. Running was a boy's solution. He walked with the measured pace of a man who chooses to be where he is. He chose the gardens. Night air had a way of undoing knots without touching them. A footman held a lantern low and guided him across gravel that had been raked into tidy lines at dusk. The lantern created a small world of light that moved at his pace. Beyond it, hedges carved by patient hands stood still and deep. Somewhere a fountain rehearsed the same small speech it had given for years. The footman bowed and stopped at the path to the moon garden, the place where flowers that loved the night were collected for morning. "I will go alone," Henri said. The footman lowered his eyes. "Yes, Your Highness." The lantern receded. The darkness made sense of itself again. He had been taught the names of these places. His tutor had quizzed him about their builders and the years they were designed. None of that knowledge mattered at this hour. What mattered was the sweetness that drifted like a thread through the hedge. It was not the heavy sweetness of a ballroom bouquet. It was a cleaner note, alive and unperformed. He followed it. He entered a small walled square where the night seemed not so much dark as full. The moon garden held plants that opened after sunset. Their blossoms were pale by habit, not by vanity. They made the old trick of shining in a dim world. He stood still because he did not want the world to shift to accommodate him. He wanted to shift for it. He did not know he had stepped on anything until the small sound reached a steady mind. It was not a crack of pain. It was a soft, crushed complaint. Then he heard a voice. "You have a royal boot and a careless foot." He turned toward the voice. It came from a figure bent over a low bed. Linen sleeves rolled to forearms, a simple cap that held hair in order, a hand that hovered above a cluster of flowers as if to protect them from apology. The voice was neither harsh nor sweet. It was level. It was a line drawn to indicate where a thing should be. "I beg your pardon," he said. He meant the words. The figure did not retreat. "If you beg forgiveness," she said, still crouched, "ask it of the jasmine, not of me. A sprig that blooms at night has little defense against a prince who does not look down." His body moved before his mind agreed. He stepped back. He glanced at the ground and saw what his boot had bruised. A small vine, fragile and firm, had opened 3 stars that would be gone by dawn. One star had been broken at its neck. The breath that had stuck in his chest since the haul loosened slightly. He looked back at her. "I did not see," he said. "Then see now," she answered. She rose to her feet, with the swift balance of someone who had learned to stand quietly in the presence of those who were not quiet. Her face came into the pool of the moon's thin light. It was not remarkable the way courtiers measured remark. It was remarkable in another scale. Her eyes did not measure him at all. They simply looked. She was perhaps 18, perhaps 20. The difference did not matter to the way she held herself. She had the steady poise of someone who had not been taught it. She had chosen it to survive. "What is your name?" he asked, because he needed something to place between them that was not mistake or apology. "Amélie," she said. No last name. Servants often gave only what was needed. He could have said his name then or allowed her to say the title and lower her eyes. He did not. He did not know why he did not. He felt the old lesson tug at him like a ribbon tied too tight. He did not break the ribbon. He let it be and stepped closer to the bed where the jasmine grew. "These flowers are meant for the morning arrangements," he said, to say something that was not about him. "They are meant for what they are," she said. "The morning is a use, not a meaning. They open when the court sleeps. That is meaning enough." He wanted to smile. He did not. The words settled in him with a slowness that felt like honesty. He watched her hand hover over the broken sprig. She did not scold him again. She pinched the stem cleanly between her fingers, removing what could not be repaired, so that what remained could bloom without being dragged down. He noticed a small knife at her waist. It was not a blade fit for a story. It was silver in the way a spoon is silver, practical and kept clean. The handle had been smoothed by years of work. She did not touch it. She did not use it as a threat or a symbol. It was there because it had a purpose and would be used when necessary. He respected that. "Why do you work at night?" he asked. "Because the flowers do," she said. "And because people leave me be when they are tired." "You prefer that," he said. "Sometimes," she answered. "It is easier to tell the truth to a plant than to a lady and her fan." He thought of the line in the hall, the fans like instruments tuning to the same note. He heard the echo of his own voice saying apron in a way it had been taught to him. He wished sharply that he could pull that word back into his mouth and turn it to paper, fold it, and put it away until it learned humility. "Do not think on it," she said, and he felt his face show more than he meant. "I did not hear your speech, I only guessed. They teach the birds inside to sing one song. It is not your fault if it is a narrow tune." "No," he said, surprised. "It is my fault. I sing well enough to please them." "You are very proud," she said, and her tone did not make proud a sin. "But you are proud of your voice, not of yourself. There is a difference. A voice belongs to those who feed it." He laughed then, a soft thing that sounded like him and not like a prince. It came out without permission. She did not flinch from it. "What would you have me be proud of?" he asked. "Of seeing what is under your foot," she said. "Of knowing a dawn that does not wait for permission." He did not have an answer for that. He felt the court again behind him, not as a wall but as a thread tied to his shoulder. It pulled gently, reminding him of hours and faces, and the next speech he would give tomorrow, and the next hand he would take in dance. It was a life he had agreed to by being born. It was not a life he hated. It was simply one that left little room for breath. Amélie bent again to her task. She moved with a kind of reverence that had nothing to do with worship and everything to do with attention. She pinched another stem, turned a leaf that was curled, loosened soil around a root with 2 fingers. Her sleeves slipped back an inch, showing wrists that had known work since childhood. He could not tell if she was poor. Servants at Versailles were not poor in the way the country was poor, but they were poor in attention. They were noticed only when they were in the way. "Do you know who I am?" he asked, trying not to make the question a test. She looked up. "A man who does not look down until he is reminded," she said, "and a man who seems relieved to be reminded." "That is not an answer," he said. "It is the answer you need," she returned, and he could not help the second laugh that came larger, and not at her. He stepped close enough to smell the cool sweetness of the jasmine. It did not want anything from him. It offered what it had. He closed his eyes and breathed once, careful to keep his boots planted. He realized he had not been careful with his body in hours. He had been careful only with his words. When he opened his eyes, she was watching him. There was no quick coyness in it. She did not flirt. She assessed. She seemed to be measuring something and finding it nearly equal to something else in her own mind. "What are you thinking?" he asked. "That some men are like gardens," she said. "High hedges, cut straight, impressive to those who like straight lines. But nothing moves, nothing scents the evening. You can walk there and become a thing that does not breathe. And then there are little squares like this. They do not announce themselves. They ask to be found. They bloom when the world thinks it is finished for the day." "And which am I?" he asked, because he wanted suddenly to belong to a sentence that had not been written by a tutor. "You do not know yet," she said, "but you came here." He wanted to tell her then the truth written on every banner in the palace. He wanted to say it because saying it would establish the order that would keep her safe. Safe meaning distant, tidy, unnamed. He did not say it because he feared the change in her eyes when she learned it. He feared the bending of her spine. He feared the apology that would come without his wanting it, the way a beau came before the king, even in an empty room. "Amélie," he said, and liked that he could say her name without anyone calculating the value of the syllables. "What do you do when the court awakes?" "I hide," she said, and smiled. "I tidy the places no one thinks about. I bring the night's work to the morning table and listen to compliments given to other hands. I'm not resentful. Work is work, but I prefer this hour. It is honest," he said. "It is quiet," she answered. "Honesty and quiet are cousins." He did not want to break the quiet. He used it as a bridge. He stepped one more pace forward. She did not step back. She lifted her chin a little, and the light caught the edge of a small locket at her throat. It hung on a slender chain, nothing that would draw notice. He saw a tiny crest etched into its face, worn by touch. He did not know its shape in that light. It looked like a memory. "Is that old?" he asked. "It is older than me," she said. "It belonged to someone who told me that truth makes a better pillow than fear. I keep it to remind my courage to wake before my fear." He nodded. He did not touch it. He did not touch her. He noticed the way her breath came steady, and the way her eyes did not dart toward the path. She was not afraid of being found here with him. That steadiness made him both proud and protective in the same heartbeat. He would not have named the second feeling a week ago. He did not name it now. He let it stand in him like a chair offered to a guest. "May I help?" he asked, gesturing toward the bed. "You might bruise the rest," she said. "Better that you learn how to stand still." He accepted the gentle rebuke. He stood still. He watched her tend the living night. Time altered its length. Minutes did not count themselves in the ordinary way. They collected around them like petals in a bowl. He did not think of the hall. He did not think of the this and the that. He thought of breath, scent, and the way the moon keeps its own counsel without asking anyone's permission to be less or more. At last she stopped. She looked at him fully. He knew in the strange and quiet way one knows with certainty that something important had already happened, and something equally important was about to happen, and both would seem small to anyone who had never been hungry for air. "You look prepared for ceremony," she said. "Your buttons shine. Your boots frighten the dew. Your hair is arranged to reassure ambassadors and frighten small children into order." He smiled. He let it be real. "That is very near to the truth." "And yet," she said, "you stand as if you are not certain whether to bow to a flower." "I am not," he said. "Then do not," she said. "Let it be itself. Let yourself be yourself for one moment before the hour finds you." He stepped closer because there was no other way to hear the last words without asking her to raise her voice. He did not want her to raise her voice. He wanted her to keep it where it was, a low thread that knit the night together. She lifted her face, not with invitation, with steadiness, with the kind of courage that listens to itself and decides. He saw her decide. He did not think he would ever see anything as clearly again. "I will give you a gift," she said. "You owe me nothing," he said, quick and quiet. "It is not a debt," she said, "it is a gift." For the man who asked if he might learn to stand still, he did not have time to step back. He did not want to. She rose on her toes with the lightness of someone used to reaching for things that belonged to taller people. Her hand did not touch him. Her mouth did. It was not a court kiss. It was not measured or weighed. It was a simple, soft press of lips upon lips. It did not ask. It did not take. It offered itself and then concluded. He did not know how to breathe for one heartbeat, then two, then a third. He discovered with surprise that felt like grief and joy at once that he had never been kissed before. He had been saluted with lips as a child. He had been brushed by cheeks in greeting. He had never been given this. The firstness of it broke something inside him that needed breaking. It was a small thing, and it was a door. She stepped back without apology. She did not blush. She did not look down. She looked at him as if measuring whether he would crush the delicate thing he had just been given under his next sentence. He found the only words that made sense. "Thank you," he said. "You are welcome," she said, and the word welcome did not sound like a mat at a door. It sounded like a space being made inside a heart. They stood in the held silence of a decision. He could say his name now. He could say his title. He could set the order of the world back into its grooves. He could also choose to be a man a few minutes longer. He lifted his hand a little, palm open, not touching, not asking, only making visible the truth that had happened. She nodded, as if to say she had seen it too. The garden breathed. Far along the hedge, in a place where the path allowed shadows to bump against one another like whispers, a small, sharp sound broke the night. It was the clean snap of a fan closing. The sound of careful shoes moved away in a measured line. Someone had seen. Morning at Versailles behaved as if nothing changed, but every voice was a thread, and all the threads tangled in one story. Servants carried basins and candles past each other, with faces arranged to say only duty. Courtiers drifted into galleries to warm themselves in the light of rumor. A word spoken in the night hardly needed hours to gather a life. By breakfast, it had a spine and teeth. They called it a trifle at first, a whisper of a whisper, a servant's folly. Then it grew its decoration, a stolen moment among hedges, a prince surprised, a girl emboldened. No one claimed to have seen with full sight. Everyone knew someone who had been near. Fans began to speak their own language. One flick meant disbelief. 2 flicks meant wicked delight. A closed fan tapping a wrist meant, "Tell me everything you heard. Omit nothing. Add what you must to make it sing." Amélie rose before the sun, as she always did. The moon garden at dawn still smelled of the night's truth. She gathered what had opened and would now wilt. She tied bundles with clean twine. She kept her hands steady and her mind narrower than usual. She tried not to think of a mouth meeting hers with the simplest courage. She tried not to think of a voice thanking her with such care. Marcel appeared near the wall with a cart for deliveries. He had a way of moving that turned him into shadow when shadows were useful. He did not grin or wink. He looked at her as one looks at someone about to step into deeper water. "You will hear them," he said simply. "I hear nothing when I work," she said. "You will hear them anyway," he said, and left. They came in pairs as if bravery required a companion. 2 maids from the linen corridor passed and did not look at her. Then, after 3 steps, looked back together and then away together as if choreographed. 2 footmen nodded in greeting and whispered behind palms. A scullery girl paused as if to take a breath, and then did not. Amélie kept tying bundles. Work placed hands between her and the air. She carried the bundles toward the office where orders were taken. That was when the chief lady-in-waiting sent for her. Madame de Vauray did not need to raise her voice to make air obey. Time slowed on the edges of any room she was in. People smiled at her the way candles do when a draught passes by. Flicker first, then steadier, then a little shorter than before. She invited Amélie into a small salon so clean it looked like it had just been born. "Child," Madame de Vore said. She was not Amélie's mother. She chose the word because it placed her above, without saying it. "You are Amélie from the Moon Garden?" "Yes, madame," Amélie said. She stood near the door, half inside, half out, because that is where one stands when one does not know if one will be wanted in the next minute. "You are diligent," Madame de Vore said. "Brother Mathieu speaks well of your morning deliveries. He says the arrangements arrive as if dawn left them there by its own hand." Amélie felt a small relief. Praise was safer than curiosity. "I only do what is asked," she said. "What is asked?" Madame de Vore repeated thoughtfully. "Yes, sometimes what is asked is not written on a page. Sometimes it is carried by what is not said." Amélie waited. She had learned that silence could be a shield. She held it now, and did not volunteer anything for the lady to turn into proof. "Tell me," Madame de Vore continued, still kind, still soft. "Did you walk in the garden last night? Before the hour when the doors shut?" "Yes, madame," Amélie said. "That is my work. Did you speak with anyone?" Madame de Vore asked. "Yes, madame," Amélie answered. "People pass through. They ask the names of flowers. They ask if they may take a sprig for a sick aunt or a child who cannot sleep." "How good you are," Madame de Vore said, and the praise felt cool enough to chill her skin. "And did you give anything else away? Something not so easily replaced?" Amélie's heart gave a quiet answer inside her chest. She would not repeat the night to anyone whose hands turned words into tools. "I do not understand, madame," she said, and she meant it in a way that did not accuse. Madame de Vore smiled with her lips, not with her face. "Ambition often wears plain clothes," she said. "It is clever at humility. Tell me, child, do you know the prince?" Amélie looked at the floor for one breath. She thought of the man who had been grateful to be reminded to look down. She thought of the relief in his laugh when it belonged to him, and not to the court's idea of him. "I know him as everyone does," Amélie said, which was almost true, "as a figure on a dais." "And as a figure in the dark?" Madame de Vore asked. Amélie lifted her head. She understood now what game was being played. The rules were simple, a question shaped like care, an answer produced under pressure. Then a little twist so the answer became its own judgment. "I tend the garden," Amélie said. "Anyone may walk there. I do not bar the path. I keep my eyes on the plants." Madame de Vore inclined her head slightly, as if acknowledging a move made competently. Then she moved her piece. "The court cannot be a barn where animals wander as they please," she said, still gentle. "We live by appearances, because appearances protect what is within. When a servant forgets this, she is not wicked. She is imprudent. She must be guided." "I have not forgotten," Amélie said. "I remember very well where I am." "Good," Madame de Vore said. "Then remember this. You have been assigned to the Moon Garden because you are careful with delicate things. Today you will be assigned to the orangery furnace rooms. Ash is simpler than rumor. It is honest. It cannot be shaped into a weapon. You will work there until I am certain your steadiness is not mistaken for presumption." The hallway outside seemed to tilt. The orangery furnaces were not punishment in a courtly sense. They were simply far from eyes. They burned all day to keep the citrus trees alive in the cold months. The work was heavy in a way that did not show. It blackened hands. It hid faces. It removed a person from talk without making drama of it. "Yes, madame," Amélie said. She would not argue. Argument would feed the story like bread feeds birds. "And one more kindness," Madame de Vore added, as if offering a ribbon. "If anyone asks you about last night, you will say nothing, not even to deny. Silence is your best gown. Wear it well." Amélie bowed her head. "Yes, madame," she said. She walked out of the salon with her body still and her mind moving. The corridors had a way of magnifying a person's temperature. She kept hers low. She went to the orangerie quietly. The furnaces greeted her with a steady breath. The men who tended them nodded once and made space without asking questions. She found an apron there, clean enough to begin, stained enough to be honest about its use. She tied it on. She began shoveling ash into baskets to be removed. The work settled into her bones like a chant. In the council chamber at the other end of the palace, the prince sat straight in a chair that allowed no lounging. Papers were laid out in ranks like soldiers awaiting inspection. The Duc d'Artois occupied a place near his shoulder. He had the art of being present without seeming to lean. His voice came lightly, as though he offered nothing but good sense arranged neatly on a plate. "You have been admired this morning," d'Artois said, as a person notes that the weather threatens to be fine. "For what?" Henri asked, which was honest. He had not been back to the garden. He had not walked past the corridor, where the smallest rumours gather before they grow bold. "For wit," d'Artois said. "Your declaration last night has repeated itself with embroidery. It does a crown good to remind the court that sentiment stirs, but it does not stir policy. If anything else has stirred, it is best not to feed prodigality with attention." Henri looked at the papers. One concerned a shipment of grain, one concerned a levy, one concerned a bouquet of names in a small German duchy, and the order in which they ought to dance with him next month. His fingers lay still on the table. He wanted to ask a question and decided to ask it. "What have you heard?" he asked. His tone was careful, designed for truth without opening his heart for display. "The usual," d'Artois said. "Someone saw someone step into a hedge. Someone heard a voice where there should have been none. Someone claims to have recognized the shape of a cap. It is all foolishness. When foolishness arises, one either ignores it or disperses it with a line. May I offer you the line?" Henri's mouth felt dry. "Offer it," he said. "In public," d'Artois said, "if the subject drifts near your chair, say merely, 'A prince has no kisses to give servants.' Then smile as if you have been asked what color the clouds were last evening. Nothing more. You must not feed their appetite with outrage or apology. Apology smells like proof." Henri thought of a hand steadying a sprig. He thought of a girl who gave the truth the size it needed and let it be no larger. He thought of the night's gift and its weight in his chest. But he was a man seated at a table where the rules did not bend easily. He nodded. "Very good," he said. "If it comes, I will send it away hungry." He did not mean to let it come. He meant to speak of grain and levies, to measure his words to the shape of duty. He would have kept to that path if a marquis with more curiosity than discretion had not laughed too loudly and broken the rhythm of the room. "Your Highness," the marquis said, seating himself without being properly invited, "we speak of bread, and yet the court starves for something sweeter. Tell us, are the flowers in the moon garden tended with the same devotion they were last night?" The jest hung there, more foolish than cruel. It asked him to dance with it. D'Artois' eyes did not move, but Henri felt the guidance like a hand at his back. He performed. He did it well. "A prince," he said, with a small curl of his lip and a voice that arranged itself into a smile, "has no kisses to give servants." The laughter came dutifully. It washed the walls. It cleaned the air of tension. It did exactly what d'Artois had promised. It erased something. Henri felt what was erased. He could not tell if it was the rumor or a piece of himself. The council moved on. The papers filled with notes. His hand wrote his name on things. His mouth formed phrases meant to be repeated. The hour ended. Another began. In the furnace rooms, Amélie lifted and poured, until her breath found a lower place to rest. Heat pressed into her cheeks and then withdrew. Ash floated where sunlight found a way through a high window. Her arms ached. It was a clean ache. It asked no questions. She preferred it to the ache of being unseen by those who claimed to see everything. She finished a basket and carried it toward the courtyard where the ash was emptied and spread. On her way, she passed along the narrow side of the chapel. The door stood half open for someone to polish a candlestick. Brother Mathieu knelt on the lowest stair, not in prayer but because age had made standing to polish a little harder. He straightened when he saw her pass with the heavy basket. "Leave it there," he said gently, pointing to the stone near the door. "Catch your breath, child." She set the basket down with care. She did not want to leave grey marks where they did not belong. As she straightened, the chain at her neck caught on the rough edge of the apron. The locket slipped loose and fell. It struck the stone with a soft sound and sprung open. It did not break. It opened as if it had been waiting. Brother Mathieu's eyes followed the glint by instinct. He leaned and picked it up with the tips of his fingers, not to claim it, but to keep it from anyone's careless step. He looked at the tiny crest engraved within. He did not breathe for a heartbeat. Memory rose like a book taken from a shelf where it had rested too long. He had seen this pattern in an old ledger, written in a hand that had died before he was born. "It is yours?" he asked, voice quieter even than the chapel demanded. "Yes," Amélie said, surprised to hear the question spoken with respect rather than greed. "It was my mother's. She told me it was old and should be kept as one keeps a small light." Brother Mathieu closed it and put it in her hand, as if finishing a ritual. "Keep it," he said. "If anyone asks, you say it is an old blessing." He would have said more. He would have told her the name that stirred at the edge of his mind, Sericourt. He would have told her of a trust and a seal. He did not. A footstep approached, and time put its finger to his lips. He patted her hand once and returned to his candlestick with the care of a man who knew how to bide. Amélie carried the basket out and returned for another. The work went on until the bell marked noon. She ate bread in a corner and drank water from a tin cup. Food made her less fragile. She could not be at the moon garden. She could not be in the halls where the story walked wearing other people's faces. She could hold herself steady in the place she had been put. That was a kind of freedom. In the afternoon, Madame de Voray sent word again. The messenger did not look at her when he gave it. Orders rarely require eye contact. She wiped her hands, washed them, wiped them again, and then presented herself. "Your steadiness impresses me," Madame de Voray said in that cooler-than-praise voice. "It reassures me that you will accept guidance." "Yes, madame," Amélie said. "Good," Madame de Voray said. She opened a drawer and laid a folded paper on the desk. It bore a seal that was not the king's. It was the minister's. The Duc d'Artois kept much of the palace running through his small signatures. "You will go to Saint-Céleste tomorrow before dawn. You will remain there until I request your return. It is a house of correction, not a prison. You will be comfortable and taught to be useful in a way that does not invite talk." Amélie felt all the warmth leave her fingers. She did not sway. The words had been arranged so sweetly that they almost tasted like opportunity. She heard under the sweetness the intention. Out of sight, out of mind, out of reach of anyone who might ask a question and want an unpainted answer. "May I see Brother Mathieu?" she asked. It was the smallest request and the most daring one she would allow herself. Madame de Voray considered and declined with a smile. "Another day," she said. "Not today. You will sleep in the servants' quarter tonight. A coach will arrive before the first bell." Amélie bowed. "As you wish, madame," she said, because to say otherwise would be to throw a stone into water and watch ripples expose everyone nearby. She walked out with a step that betrayed nothing. Marcel found her an hour later, his face alight with questions he did not ask, because he knew that questions had begun to cost too much. "They are sending me," she said plainly. "Where?" he asked, in a whisper that turned the air into a confessional and a shield at once. "Saint-Céleste," she said. Marcel's eyes flashed. "Correction," he said, and spit the word to one side, not as an insult, but to get it out of his mouth. "You will not stay there. I may have no choice," she said. "We will make one," he said. "Do nothing foolish," she told him. "Foolishness helps those who like to point." He nodded. He had been ready to be foolish. He let the readiness go as one lets a bird fly because the cage is too expensive to keep. They spoke of practical things. She would pack only what she needed. She would leave the rest. She would sleep. She would be ready to be what the hour required, and then something else when the hour had left. Night came with its cool hand. The palace quieted itself in a way that was not quiet at all. Servants moved more quietly. Powerful people moved more loudly, believing themselves to be invisible when the candlelight shook. Amélie lay on her pallet and watched a square of moon make and unmake itself on the floor. She did not cry. She had long ago learned that tears were a tax paid to no one who deserved the revenue. Near midnight, Marcel tapped lightly at the door. She rose at once. He slipped into the narrow space and stood close because there was no room to stand otherwise. "I have only this," he said, and held out a folded scrap. The hour and the door. They changed it to before the first bell, not dawn, earlier, when even the mice are still. It is not kindness. It is because early hours make fewer eyes. "Thank you," she said, and placed her fingers for a moment on his hand. It was enough blessing for a friend. He swallowed. "If I had a badge, I would wave it," he said. "If I had a law, I would point to it. I have only feet and a mouth." "Bring neither into danger," she said. "Keep both for tomorrow." He nodded again and left with the same care with which he had come. At the same hour, in rooms where the air belonged to him by decree, Henri stood before his window. He had tried to sleep, and found his mind combing through the day's sentences, searching for the one he wished he had not spoken. He had said the line, it had pleased them. His mouth had been the court's instrument, and he had played the note. He saw the garden in his head more clearly than the council table. He saw a girl's face more easily than the marks on a paper. He did not name this to himself, he only named what he could: regret. A servant came softly, as trained, and placed a small object on the sill. No note, no flourish, only a sprig of night jasmine, carefully cut with a clean pinch. He did not ask who had brought it. He did not ring to call anyone back. He picked it up and held it near his face, and the scent told him with more authority than any minister what he must do next. He dressed without calling for help. He left his hair as it was. He put on a cloak and went out by the corridor that guards had learned to ignore when a prince needed to breathe. The moon garden held the last of the night's cool. It also held absence. He could feel it before he could name it. The small order of tasks that had greeted him in the dark before had been interrupted by the kind of order that written instructions enforce. The beds were neat. The baskets were not where they had been. The bench where she had set her knife held nothing. He waited, thinking she might step from behind a hedge with her sleeves rolled and her calm eyes ready to scold him for moving too quickly. The waiting stretched to uselessness. He turned toward the path that would take him near the servants' quarter. He did not plan what words he would say. He trusted his mouth less tonight than he trusted his feet. In the small hours, doors open and close with louder hearts. A coachman cleared his throat. A porter shuffled. A hinge argued and then agreed. Amélie stood with her apron folded under her arm, a small bundle at her feet. She had slept a little. She had arranged her hair. She had told herself that order was its own revolt, and she practiced it now. She held herself as if going on a visit and not being removed. The coach stood at the back gate. It was not a grand carriage. It was an honest vehicle for errands, draped with the courtesy of a seal pinned discreetly to its leather band. The seal bore the minister's crest, not the king's. That meant speed and less paperwork. The porter looked at the letter again, reading without moving his eyes, as some men do when they do not want to own the words they carry. He folded it and tucked it into his sleeve. He touched the brim of his cap at Amélie. Not quite a bow, not quite a command. The coachman shifted in his seat and wound the reins around his glove. Marcel stood near enough to watch, far enough not to be accused of interfering. Brother Mathieu was not there. He would learn at dawn, and wish he had not slept. Henry turned the corner of the service passage and saw the shape of the coach through the arch. He did not call out. He stepped faster. He did not run. A prince does not run through his own house, but his feet forgot their lessons for a moment and moved as if they belonged to a boy again. Amélie lifted her bundle. The coachman looked down from his seat with the tolerant patience of someone who has been told that the business he conducts is beyond his understanding and that this is a kindness. The porter reached for the gate latch. The latch lifted with a small metallic sigh that sounded louder than a gunshot would in a quiet room. The coachman flicked the reins once to test the bit. The horses leaned the smallest amount, enough to turn breath into motion. The coach wheels began to roll. The coach wheels turned the way orders turn, quietly and with the weight of someone else's decision. Amélie stepped toward the open door because that is what one does when told that correction is a kindness. Marble and brick do not argue. They simply echo. "Hold," Marcel said, not loudly, not to anyone important, but to the air in front of him, and the word slipped under the coachman's habit so neatly that the man checked his hands without knowing why. "We have a problem with the seal," Marcel added with a frown that suggested he had been scolded already for missing something. He pointed at the small crest pinned to the leather band. "Madame orders that the band should carry the older device, not the minister's. I was told to fetch Brother Mathieu to witness it. They say the convent prefers old seals." The coachman squinted down. He did not care about seals, old or new. He cared about not being blamed later. The porter looked at the crest, then at the letter tucked into his sleeve, then at the path toward the chapel. "Quickly then," the porter said. "Fetch the brother." Marcel nodded and moved with purpose toward the chapel. He did not run. He had learned that running brings attention, and attention is the opposite of time. He disappeared around the corner. Amélie stood at the step, her bundle still in her hand. The breath in her chest felt arranged, careful, as if it had been borrowed. She looked toward the hedge as if the garden itself might come and say no. When Brother Mathieu turned and saw Marcel in the doorway, the old man's face shifted from candle-warmed to alarm that had nothing to do with fear for himself. "They are taking her," Marcel said, soft as the chapel demanded. "Now, before dawn, has the chance to become a witness." Brother Mathieu put down the cloth with which he had been polishing and did not waste a sentence on complaint. He stepped into the corridor with a knowledge of the floor that came from years of small errands done for big souls. He reached the gate, as if he had been invited all along. "Forgive me," he said to the porter with the gentle authority of someone who blesses bread. If the convent is named, the old rule asks that a parish hand note the departure. The ledger in the sacristy is ready. It takes a minute. We will be exact. The porter, relieved to have a rule to hold, nodded. "Be exact then," he said. He waved a hand toward the chapel door. "A minute." Amélie did not move until Brother Mathieu met her eyes. He did not bind her with instruction. He simply gave a small incline of his head that said, "Do not waste what you have been given." In the sacristy, where walls held the smell of wax and old wood, Brother Mathieu set a narrow book on the table. It contained columns for names and dates, for places entered and left, for reasons official and reasons remembered by the one who wrote them. He opened it and did not begin writing. "Is your locket with you?" he asked. "Yes," she said, touching the chain at her throat where the small weight rested like a promise. "Open it," he said. "Let the face warm in your hand." She obeyed, not understanding why warmth would matter. The metal took her heat as metal does, slowly and with patience. The engraved crest inside raised itself to clarity as if waking. Brother Mathieu's hands trembled. "Séricourt," he murmured, tasting the syllables as if they belonged to a prayer left unsaid too long. "Child, listen. This is not a trinket. This is a mark from a line that sleeping men think is dead. It is tied to a charter that runs under the floorboards of the crown itself. There is a trust, money pledged long ago to support duties that cannot be delayed or decorated. It has protections. It names a custodian." "I am not a custodian of anything," Amélie said, even as her fingers closed around the locket without thinking. "You are, whether you knew it or not," he said. "The law slept because honest people forgot to wake it, and dishonest people prefer sleep. The crest in your locket matches the seal I have kept in a drawer all these years, waiting for a hand brave enough to hold it. When the line of Séricourt dwindles, the keeper of the trust, through the maternal branch if needed, is to be recognized, for the sake of the funds and their use. It is written plainly. I have read it. Few else have." "Why me?" she asked, not to reject, but because she needed to know whether the floor under her feet existed or was another rumor. "Because your mother kept the locket true," he said. "Because you have rendered service as the charter defines it, guardianship of a royal place and honest accounts, because the crest opens in your hand as if it were in a cradle, not in a cabinet." The porter coughed faintly from the corridor to remind them of minutes passing. Marcel shifted his weight like a man pushing a door with his shoulder while pretending to rest. "What would you have me do?" Amélie asked. "You speak as if paper could stop a coach." "Paper can stop many coaches if the right voice reads it," Brother Mathieu said. "You must show this to the prince." Amélie's heart did an unwise thing then. It climbed toward her throat. "I cannot show him anything from a convent," she said. "They are sending me before the bell." "You will not go far," Brother Mathieu replied, voice calm. "There is another way. This book has older companions. Come." He moved with a swiftness that belonged to memory rather than youth. He led her through a narrow passage into a side archive. It was not grand. It did not have gilding. It had shelves that held thin volumes bound in leather, darkened by generation after generation of careful touch. He knew exactly which one to take. He pulled a ledger from the middle shelf. Its spine cracked the way honesty sometimes does when asked to stretch. He opened it on a table that had hosted humble bread and elaborate signatures in its time. He turned pages with a finger that did not shake now. He found the crest stamped in wax on a strip of ribbon, brittle but whole. Beside it, the scrolled hand of a clerk, too proud of his flourishes, had written, "Charter of Séricourt Trust, pledged to the crown for the maintenance of sacred lights and the relief of crisis, to be administered by the custodian recognized through the line of Sericourt, with protection from prejudice in the performance of duty. "Read the clause," he said, and pointed to a paragraph that had been little touched by fingers and much touched by time. She read. The words were formal, but not clever. They meant what they said. If the line had fallen to a single heir without power in the world, that person, upon presentation of the crest, and proof of service to the crown's good, could be recognized with dignity to guard the funds against misuse. It was not about honor granted for flattery. It was about setting a lamp in a windless place so that the flame did not go out when blown upon by mouths with better titles. "Who misuses it?" she asked. Brother Mathieu's face turned from candle-warm to the stillness of a man deciding whether to step into a storm. He reached into the ledger where, tucked like a pressed flower, lay a small paper with recent ink. He smoothed it. The handwriting was plainer, quicker. It had names. It had amounts. It had dates that ran up to this year. The line at the bottom bore a signature, Duc d'Artois in that elegant hand, that had passed through too many decisions without anyone stopping to see where it left ink. "Others too," Brother Mathieu said softly. "But his hand appears more often. The trust has been treated as a personal purse for the smoothing of matters that should have been brought to light. If you enter that coach and go beyond the reach of those who remember the old rules, the misuse will continue. If you remain, the trust can be restored in daylight. It will change the shape of what they ask from the prince. It will give him a choice they have told him he does not have." Amélie closed the locket with a click that sounded louder than it was. "You make it sound as if I decide whether a man is free." "You decide whether the truth that frees him is hidden again," he corrected. "He must still choose to take hold of it." Marcel at the door let a breath out through his nose that sounded like a man learning to release a horse's reins gently when it wants to bolt. "Brother," he murmured, "the porter will begin to count. Counting makes stone move." Brother Mathieu closed the ledger and put it back with the same care he would give a sleeping child. He did not pocket the small paper. He left it where it had always been. He took a separate compact copy, a small extract he himself had made years ago when he feared the day would come and he would not be alive to guide it. He slid the extract into Amélie's bundle so that it would sit beneath the folded apron she had placed on top. It would not rattle there. It would be a quiet truth. "Go," he said, and there was no drama in it, only a simple instruction given when the hour demands movement. "Say nothing to those who are hungry for gossip. Speak to the prince if the chance opens. Show him the crest. If he is what I think he can be, he will see." They returned to the door. The porter looked at the ledger's new line with relief. Paper calmed him. He set his hand back on the latch and raised it. The coachman glanced at the sky as if waiting for it to change its mind. As Amélie placed her foot on the step of the coach, Madame de Voray came into view the way moonlight comes into a room without being invited. She had not hurried. She did not need to. The sight of her made the coachman straighten, the porter smooth his sleeve, and Marcel lower his eyes to a place where rage could not be read. "Child," Madame de Voray said, and in that word was the whole patience of a mother and the whole power of a major domo. "Remember your silence. The world will thank you for not injuring yourself with defense." "I will be quiet," Amélie said. She meant, "I will be quiet in my way, not in yours." Madame de Voray's gaze drifted delicately to the chain at Amélie's neck. She did not reach. She did not ask. Her eyes returned to Amélie's face. She smiled the way a person does when they have successfully picked up a needle from a floor without bending. "Good," she said. "Go in peace." The door closed. The coach moved. Henri, crossing a shadowed corridor that felt both too narrow and too long, stepped into the chapel by a side entrance he had used as a boy when he wanted to feel that faith belonged to him and not to ceremonies. Brother Mathieu was there, and not by accident. "Your Highness," Brother Mathieu said, and bowed with the economy of someone who does not waste the prince's time or his own. "I have been saving a truth for you." "I save it no longer," Henri said, and the words came out with a dryness that told more to the old man than tone could. Brother Mathieu set the extract on the table, and with it, the knowledge he had gathered over years spent in corners and libraries, watching titled men walk past old sentences as if they were furniture. He spoke cleanly. He spoke of a trust that did not belong to a man's need to be comfortable. He spoke of a locket with a crest that matched a seal. He spoke of the clause that, once read, altered the shape of a prince's excuses. Henri did not interrupt. He did not dignify the name in the margins by saying it aloud. He recognized the signature without help. He understood what it meant for a minister to use old money for new quiet. He also understood what it meant for a girl with a locket to be inconvenient to people who had become used to arranging the court's conscience. "Where is she?" he asked. "On the road to Saint-Céleste," Brother Mathieu said. "Sent before the first bell, which is the hour chosen by those who prefer to make decisions without daylight." Henri's mind lined up possible paths like chessmen. He could go to the hall, call for counsel, request this or that. He could be proper and fail, or he could be a man who steps into a carriage and tells the air what it will be for once. He turned toward the door. "Send a note to my father," he said. "Say I have gone to make a correction in the king's name and mine. Take this," Brother Mathieu said, and folded the extract into Henri's hand. "It is smaller than the truth it holds, but it will do until the larger truth stands in the Hall of Mirrors. And your Highness—" Henri turned back. "Be gentle," Brother Mathieu said. "She has been brave in a way the court does not know how to honor." Henri inclined his head. "I will be what she deserves," he said, and left. On his way through a smaller salon, as he crossed the path that many ladies use to practice their soft attacks, Madame de Voray appeared as if the room had arranged itself to produce her. She lifted a hand. He could not pretend not to see it, without insulting the order of things. "Your Highness," she said in a voice that could have calmed a fever, "may I trouble you with a trivial matter? There is a girl, Amélie, whose presence seems to have troubled the edges of your comfort. I have relieved her of that burden." His face did not change. He had been trained to keep his muscles still even when his heart caught fire. "You relieve many burdens, madame." "It is my work," she said. "I hear that foolish people have put words into your mouth that you did not place there. They suggest you were where you should not have been. I know better. I know you are always precisely where duty sets you. I was where night allowed me to breathe," he said, not to confess, but because he found himself unable to let her own his air. "Let me suggest," she said, still soft, "that the best way to end foolishness is to walk directly into the next room and be seen speaking of taxes. Rumor dies in the light of arithmetic." "And if arithmetic proves that a trust has been miscounted?" he asked. He held her eyes and let the question stand. He watched the tiniest tilt of her head, the tidy rearrangement of her plan behind her face. She was not frightened. She was too experienced for that. She was only calculating whether the ledger he mentioned was one she could control. "I am always in favor of correct sums," she replied. "Let me know what you require." "I require that you not send anyone beyond the reach of a bell in my name," he said. "Not today." "I have sent no one in your name," she returned mildly. "I have sent a servant to rest from the noise of the court. It is in the minister's hand." "The minister has placed his hand where it does not belong," Henri said, not loudly, "and he will remove it." Madame de Voray's fan rested on the table, closed. Her fingers did not touch it. He noticed that she was not arming herself with it. She was preparing to retreat to another position. She bowed with a grace that avoided argument and made obedience unnecessary. "As you wish, Your Highness," she said. "I shall attend to the receiving of ambassadors and leave the care of bells to you." He left her in the salon because his minutes were coins now, and he had to spend them quickly to buy larger hours later. He reached the courtyard where his own carriage waited, because the world arranges itself for princes even when they are late to their own decisions. He climbed in and told the driver to Saint-Céleste by the right road and a fast horse. The door closed. The carriage jolted. The hedges of Versailles fell behind like rows of obedient soldiers. On the road, dawn began to think of itself. The line between night and morning softened enough for choices to look less stark and more possible. Henri held the extract in his hand. He did not read it again. He had memorized what mattered. He looked out at the fields that did not care about rumors and thought of a locket warmed in a girl's palm. He understood that he had made a vow last night, even if he had not said it aloud. He had promised himself to the smallest true thing he had ever known. He had also denied it in public, because men he owed deference to told him that was prudence. He was going now to see if he could undo the worst of the injury. At Saint-Céleste, the bell had not yet rung. The convent walls had the peace of places that keep their rules without injury to anyone who lives inside them. The gate was not heavy. but it had the weight of habit. A letter had arrived moments before, carried by a rider who did not stop to water his horse. The letter bore the minister's crest. The Mother Superior had read it with a face that did not betray approval or discomfort, only the kind of acceptance that vows teach and days reinforce. The coach pulled up. The coachman had attained the quiet triumph of a task accomplished early. The porter at the gate checked the crest pinned to the band with the letter in his sleeve, and nodded as one who is grateful to have signs agree. He lifted a hand to the coachman. The door opened. Amélie stepped down. The air smelled different here. It smelled like linen dried without perfume. It smelled like prayers that did not ask for favors but for quiet. She looked at the stone under her feet and told her heart to walk straight. She would not disgrace herself by looking back at a road she could not run. The Mother Superior came toward her, with hands that did not reach but could, if needed, hold. Her eyes were not cruel. They simply measured what had been brought to her care. "Welcome," she said. "You will rest and learn. It is not a punishment to be asked to be small for a time. Sometimes it is a relief. Sometimes," Amélie repeated, and could not tell whether she agreed. The porter turned the latch. The gate swung inward. The coachman adjusted his reins as if he could already feel the lightness in his arms that would come when the carriage headed back, not burdened with a passenger. Hooves sounded behind them on the road, not the leisurely rhythm of a courier content to have made good time, a firmer cadence. The Mother Superior lifted her head. The porter's hand, of its own training, paused. The coachman turned in his seat because curiosity outranks habit when a new presence arrives in a scene that thought itself complete. A royal carriage came into view, not draped in show, not followed by a train, but marked by the certainty with which the horses approached. It stopped at the gate with an economy that spoke of a driver who understood when to be a line in a sentence and when to be a period. The door opened. Henri stepped down. He did not shout. He did not raise his arm. He did not claim a right. He stood where the ground belonged to no one and everyone and said, in a steady voice that the gate would remember longer than any letter held in a sleeve, "She does not enter." The gate did not argue with him. It simply held still. Amélie felt the breath of the moment move through all of them. The porter's training, the Mother Superior's calm, the coachman's habit, the prince's voice. She did not step back until the Mother Superior inclined her head as one woman to another, as one keeper of rules to another keeper of a different kind. "We do not defy the crown," the Mother Superior said, voice level as a measure. "We serve it by keeping a quiet house. If a quiet is to be kept here, it must begin with obedience. Prince, you have made a claim with your mouth. Will you also sign it with your name?" "Yes," Henri said. "Now." The Mother Superior glanced to the porter, who brought a book that had seen more vows than visitors. She turned it to a fresh page. Henri wrote, in a hand unused to this ledger, that he recalled the order and took responsibility for the girl named Amélie to be presented at Versailles for honorable review. He left space for the king's counter-signature and did not pretend his name was larger than his father's. He handed the pen back. The Mother Superior read without dramatics. She nodded and closed the book. "She may stand where the air is open," she said. "If you have brought trouble, Prince, take it with you gently. This house does not like noise. I have brought a correction," he said, "and I will take it gently." Amélie stepped away from the threshold. The porter released the latch. The coachman, not unhappy to avoid the inward turn through a narrow gate, eased his horses backward with care. Marcel, who had stolen the courage to follow halfway down the road, stood still, unsure whether to praise heaven or worry that men in fine coats would soon gather to rearrange the world back to its liking. Henri turned to Amélie and did the simplest thing first. He bowed. It was not the deep bend of formalities, only a respectful lowering that said, "I see you." "I came late," he said quietly, "but I came." "You came," she said, and the words held the weight of a door that opens because one person decided to turn the handle. "I spoke a line this morning," he went on, and did not dress it. "It made a room laugh. It made me smaller. I am sorry." Amélie held his gaze. She felt her anger, quick and sharp, take one step forward, and then she set a hand on its shoulder and asked it to wait. He had stood at her gate and used his name to make space. Apologies might be poetry. Actions were the deed. "Words are tools," she said. "Sometimes the wrong tool is used for a delicate task. You can lift it now and choose better." "I will," he said. but I will need your help to choose right." She breathed once. "Tell me how." "There is a ledger and a crest and a law that has slept," he said. "Brother Mathieu showed me. He says you carry the key in plain sight." She looked down at the locket. She had worn it always. It had been nothing more than courage touching her throat when fear rose. Now it seemed to glow with a duty she had never asked for, but would not refuse. "I do not know how to use this key," she said. "I do," he said, and then, kinder, "We do. Together." They returned to Versailles with a road's dust on their shoes and a small, precise plan between them. It was not a scheme. It was not even a strategy. It was a reading. Paper held words. Words, read aloud in front of people who pretended not to remember, could make a floor appear where men had been taught to walk on air. Back at the chapel, Brother Mathieu greeted them like a man whose worry had been folded neatly and put away. He led them to the side archive again, and did not bother to apologize for the room's modesty. Modesty had done good work here. "You have the extract?" Henri asked. "I have it," Brother Mathieu said, patting his pocket. "And the ledger itself, if you want to make boasting small. Paper likes to be useful." "Paper will be useful," Henri said. He turned to Amélie. "Will you trust me with this?" He indicated the locket. She unfastened the chain with measured hands. When she placed the locket in his palm, it was not surrender, it was ceremony. He closed his fingers and felt the small, old weight there speak larger than coins. "We will not do this in a whisper," he said. "We will do it before mirrors, so that lies must look at themselves." Brother Mathieu's mouth gave the smallest hint of a smile. "A good place for repentance," he said, "and for memory." It was not a simple matter to convene voices in the Hall of Mirrors without making a festival of it. But the court was always ready for an assembly. A summons that mentioned a charter, and a correction found men and women willing to stand still if it meant being near the place where something might change without their having to take responsibility for it. By midday, the hall carried the soft hum of important attention. Gentlemen practiced neutrality with their faces. Ladies selected fans that could speak firmly without snapping. The king took his accustomed place, not because anyone needed reminder who wore the crown, but because rooms have shapes, and he completed this one. Henri stood with a quiet in him that had not visited often. It was not the empty quiet of exhaustion. It was the filled quiet of a task chosen. He looked at Amélie once before the herald's voice made sound in the long room. She stood near Brother Mathieu, where shadows allowed a person to breathe. She did not tremble. He was grateful for that. He did not know if he would have had the strength to stand if she had. Madame de Vorey came as duty demanded. She took a position where she could see faces and index futures. She held her fan closed in a sign of attention. The Duc d'Artois arrived without fuss and greeted those near him as if nothing interesting had ever happened in his life, except the next sentence he would control. He moved with the poise of someone who expects his day to obey. Henri stepped forward, did not glance at d'Artois, and spoke to his father. "Sire," he said, "there is an old gift we have been in danger of forgetting. It carries your seal from generations ago. It is not a bauble. It is a duty we owe not to a man, but to the care of those who trust us." The king's eyes sharpened. He had watched sons speak in many tones. He knew this one. It was the tone they sometimes found when they had discovered that obedience without love becomes rebellion in secret. He inclined his head for Henri to continue. Brother Mathieu was called, and no one smirked. Even those who lived on patronage had the sense to go still when someone with white hair and polished hands carried paper as if it had weight. He opened the ledger on a table and showed the seal. He did not lecture, he read. He read the clause that had put itself to sleep and now woke in the king's rooms. He read about Séricourt, a trust pledged to the crown to keep sacred lights burning and to answer crises with a hand that did not ask for applause. He read the protection for the custodian. If the line dwindled to one who served without being seen, that person could be recognized with dignity, so that thieves would be discouraged and the trust would not be a jar left on a shelf for anyone to dip into when they felt like sweetening their tea. He closed the ledger and stepped back. Henri took the extract and held the locket so the crest could be seen. "This," he said, "opens in the hand of Amélie. She tends the night flowers so that the court can speak of their scent in mourning. She has served in a way the charter recognizes. She is the last of the name through her mother. She is not a sympathy I ask you to indulge. She is a custodian the law provided for. No one laughed. Madame de Voray's brows drew together one line's width. Duc d'Artois looked not at the locket, but at the ledger. He made the subtle move of a man preparing to say that this was interesting but impractical, this was touching but not binding, this was an old sentence that did not understand the needs of today. Henri did not let him shape the air first. "There is another matter," he said. He put the extract on the table and opened it to the list of diversions. "This small paper carries larger shadows. Funds pledged to lighten crisis have been redirected to smooth private corridors. Names are written plainly, as if the writer believed time would make ink disappear." There was a small sound in the room that only old rooms know how to make, when a lie learns that it is about to be addressed by name. D'Artois' face did not change. He had trained it not to. "Your Highness," he said in a voice that had dismissed many awkward facts, "one must understand that commitments are sometimes met by means not anticipated by old charters. Emergencies are frequent. The Crown requires flexibility." "The Crown requires honesty," Henri answered. "Flexibility is not a word for taking what is not yours, because it is not guarded by popular noise." All eyes shifted to the king. He looked at the seal, the extract, and his son. He had outlived many ministers. He knew the difference between discretion and manipulation. He did not care for being used as a curtain. "D'Artois," the king said, with the old familiarity of sovereigns and servants who have shared too many rooms, "your hand appears too often in a margin that should be clean." D'Artois inclined his head. "I have always served, sire." "Then you will serve by stepping aside," the king said, "while men with cool tempers and accurate pens read what you have signed. If they find prudence, you will be restored. If they find convenience dressed as duty, you will be thanked for your years and retire to a smaller life." No one clapped. This was not theatre. It was administration. Two secretaries who had not been told until a moment ago that they would play this part came forward with dignity that had little to do with their clothing. They escorted d'Artois from the room without touching his arm. Madame de Voray watched without blinking. She had just lost her best weather vane. She kept her posture. She understood that to keep her place she must bend to the new wind. Henri turned back to the ledger and the locket, not to triumph, but to finish. "Sire," he said, "I ask recognition, not for me, but for the Charter. I ask that the custodian be named and protected so that the trust resumes its proper path. I ask that the old law walk again among us, not as a ghost, but as a steward." The king nodded once. "It shall be as the Charter prescribes," he said. "Who is this custodian we honor?" Amélie stepped forward. She did not trip because fear had taught her to place her feet carefully on difficult floors. She felt the weight of watching on her shoulders and let it sit there only as long as necessary. Brother Mathieu stood behind her like a pillar that did not ask for gratitude. Henri stood one step to the side, not to eclipse, not to push, but to show to whose light he would belong if she allowed it. State language was shorter than people imagine. It did not need filigree. The king spoke the name that had been sleeping, and with it, the recognition. He called her custodian. He called her by the title that the Charter had written into the margin for a day like this, Marquise de Séricourt, named so for the protection of the fund and the clear passage of duty. The room shifted in that small way rooms do, when they must remember a new fact and make space for it without moving a single chair. Madame de Voray stepped forward then, because this was her work. She came no nearer than etiquette allowed, and performed the smallest of rituals with all the grace that made her valuable. She took a ribbon that had waited in a drawer for a decade and pinned it near the locket to mark what words had already marked. Her fingers were steady. She did not speak beyond what was required. "Madame la Marquise," she said. The sound of the title in her mouth did not taste of defeat. It tasted of adjustment. The court watched and practiced the same. Henri stood where he ought, and then stepped forward to where he chose. He did not kneel because this was not that kind of theatre. He lowered himself to her height in a way that made space smaller between them without claiming it. He spoke so that the room could hear and so that she would know this was not a promise whispered and later denied. "You gave me one true thing," he said. "I have not forgotten. I cannot ask your forgiveness without also asking for your future. Will you let me stand beside you, not above you, while I learn to keep my words as carefully as you keep your garden?" Silence in a hall can be cruel. This silence was kind. It made room for her breath. Amélie felt that she ought to be afraid. Fear did not come. Other feelings did. Gratitude, simple and clean. Relief not because she was raised, but because the thing that had been used to push her away had been called by its name and returned to its place. And something like joy, but not dizzying. Joy with its shoes on. She looked at the man who had found her in the night, and then found himself. She did not look at the mirrors to see how they looked. She looked only at him. "I will," she said softly, and then louder because this too must be public. Yes, there is always someone who sighs when a room cannot keep its composure. The hall sighed, and the sigh became a small softness that ran along the mirrors and came back to stand beside them. Henri did not reach for her hand there. He had learned something about keeping gifts in the right hour. He bent his head once, as if the day might hear and be blessed by the shape of his acknowledgement. Brother Mathieu wiped his eye as if a speck of dust had remembered to visit at an inconvenient time. The king leaned back. He looked at his son with a pride he did not turn into a smile, because smiles make some men speak too long. Madame de Voret let her fan open and close with a dignity that did not inform on her thoughts. The herald did not declare a feast. Henri did not permit spectacle to rush in. He asked that the chapel be opened for a brief thanksgiving, the one with the short prayer about lamps and hands, not the long one about triumph and enemies. People filed out with the measured rustle of events that have found their proper end. In the quiet that followed, when corridors had swallowed gossip for later and the hall had gone back to being a room with too many windows, Henri and Amélie stood once more in the small space of the chapel aisle. It was cooler there. The stone admitted truth more easily than mirrors. "I have something else to say," he told her, offering words like water in a clean cup. "Say it," she said. "I thought I knew what honor was," he said. "I thought it was a list of tasks done in the right order with the right face. Today I learned that honor is a person's peace when they go to their bed at night. You have that peace. I want it. It is not kept by rank," she answered, kind and clear. "It is kept by the attention you pay to your smallest choices. Start with your mouth. Make it say less when less is truthful. Make it say more when more is needed. You will become a man who breathes without asking permission." He smiled, not the practiced one. "I will practice," he said. He looked down at the locket now resting near the ribbon Madame de Voret had pinned. "May I?" She lifted the chain as if giving him a task. He fastened it again at her nape. His fingers were careful. They did not linger. They learned. When they stepped back into the corridor, Marcel waited at the far end with the glad face of a man who had kept himself from foolishness and discovered wisdom paying him a visit anyway. He bowed too low because relief steals grace, and Amélie made a small gesture with her hand that told him to stand up straight and keep his pride. "Marcel," Henri said, because a prince learns more in a day like this than in years of formal instruction, "you are thanked." "I did nothing," Marcel said. "You did something," Henri returned. "You used your mouth to make time. That is not nothing." Marcel flushed and backed away with the good sense of someone who knows when to keep his blessings and not tax them. Brother Mathieu resumed his steady work of being where truth could find him. Madame de Voret quietly sent away the notice she had written in anticipation of a different outcome, and instructed the scribe to write a new one with the same hand, different sentence. Evening drew its line. The moon garden waited exactly as it had before any of this began. It did not know titles. It knew openings and closings. Amélie went there with Henri because places where beginnings happen hold courage like a pitcher holds water. They walked without speaking for a time. The jasmine had not decided yet whether to open. The decision would be made when darkness leaned the right way across the beds. "Do you regret giving me the gift?" he asked at last, not to pull praise from her, but to test his understanding of gratitude. "No," she said. "It taught you the taste of truth. Now you will know if you are hungry." "I am," he said. "Then we will eat honestly," she said with the smallest smile. And he laughed because it was an answer that did not pretend this would be easy. It would be work. He was ready to work. They stood a little while longer until the first white star of jasmine opened on its own schedule. He did not touch it, neither did she. They watched it be itself and learned. Somewhere beyond the hedges, a bell marked the hour with simple strokes. Inside the palace, messengers repinned their errands and diplomats rearranged their notebooks, The trust that had been gashed by careless hands returned to a proper course with the slow patience of a stream redirected to its old bed. People would talk. They always did. But tonight the talk would have to wrap itself around a fact too clear to be ignored. A prince had chosen to be a man in public, and a servant had chosen to hold steady while the room shifted. Amélie took Henry's arm then, not because she needed support to walk, but because walking together turns two separate paths into one. He did not mistake the gesture. He offered the smallest pressure of his hand in answer. They moved toward the chapel, where the short prayer would be said, and away from the hall where long speeches waited for tomorrow. Night came in its good time. Candles were lit, because habit and hope both prefer light. In a few days there would be a wedding with little display and much meaning. But for now the day had done enough. The court could rest, the garden could breathe, and two people who had been told all their lives where to stand could for once decide for themselves. The mornings after great changes are always strangely ordinary. Bread is still bread. The sky does what it wishes. But in the small adjustments of people's faces, in the way doors open a half-inch sooner, in the softened hush before a name is said, one can feel the palace learning a new rhythm. The day after the Hall of Mirrors, the corridors of Versailles moved around Henri and Amélie with a respect that had nothing to do with fear. People stepped aside not because titles pass like carriages, but because dignity, once recognized, alters the space it occupies. They met the foreign envoy in a salon that had seen treaties born and starved. The man wore his country well, plain fabric cut so precisely that nothing needed embroidery to announce its value. He had a face used to adding and subtracting other men's promises. He bowed with accuracy and waited to like what he heard. "Your Highness," he began, "we read that your intended marriage, so useful to the balance we share, has altered its course. My sovereign would not ask a prince to marry without love if love can be had somewhere else. My sovereign would also not ask his people to go hungry for romance." Henri inclined his head. He had practiced his mouth in the chapel after the prayer, and practice had become something like habit. He spoke no more than the truth requested. "Then let us not speak of romance," he said. "Let us speak of bread and bridges. The Séricourt Trust has been restored. It exists to answer needs that do not care for ballads. I propose we endow together the projects that your sovereign's councillors number first when they look at maps. The road from your northern province to our eastern market, the school for engineers who will build without deceit, the hospital whose doors open to all uniforms and none. We will contribute a sum from the trust equal to yours. We ask no parade. We ask for ledgers open to both courts, so that arithmetic becomes the language of alliance." The envoy's eyes flickered once, not in surprise at generosity, but in respect for clarity. He looked to Amélie, because men who have crossed borders learn that women sometimes carry the bridge that holds. "You are the custodian," he said. She did not let the new title weigh down her answer. "I am," she said, "and I will be glad to show your accountants any page that bears the trust's name. Paper should prefer daylight. It seldom does," the envoy said. "That is why we must lift the windows." They spoke for an hour without rhetoric. They brought figures forward and sent them back to consult. They agreed in stages, and each stage held because none of it was a castle built from air. When at last the envoy rose, his bow differed by a degree from the one he had brought into the room. It was a sign to his own men that this treaty would not need flattery to keep it warm. "It will be said," he told Henri, "that you refused my sovereign's cousin for a girl who tended flowers. I will answer that you chose a woman who tends accounts and nations. These are not opposed if one is honest." "We will be honest," Henri said. The envoy smiled with one side of his mouth. "Be so, and we will forget to gossip. We will be too busy counting." When he left, the room exhaled in relief that had not asked for permission. A minister, new to his desk and still allergic to the perfume of secrets, entered and laid his hand where d'Artois' palm had rested for years. He did not announce that things would change. He asked for the ink. He refilled the wells. He wrote without flourish what the envoy's men had agreed would stand. Word drifted through the palace and then out its gates. Some ladies tried on the phrase "Madame la Marquise," the way one tries on a hat in a mirror that might lie. Some gentlemen calculated their daughter's prospects anew and learned that arithmetic is patient, not always kind. A few hearts opened their shutters and let a neighbor's joy in. They had not done that in years. It made their faces younger. Madame de Vauret requested a visit with Amélie at an hour when the corridors doze, and even ambition lowers its voice. They met in a small gallery that overlooked a courtyard where orange trees were wintering under glass walls, warmed by humble fires. The praise that had once been offered in this gallery like sugared fruit had been replaced today by air that could be breathed. "Madame," Amélie said with courtesy. She offered no more, no less. "Madame la Marquise," Madame de Vauret replied, with a bow so precise and so free of sarcasm that it remade itself into respect. "I have come to bring you something that is not my habit to carry." "What is that?" Amélie asked. "A change," Madame de Vauret said. "I am skilled at preserving. I am not known for altering. Yet I am not blind. Yesterday I would have called your assent an error of sentiment. Today I have read the Charter. I have seen numbers that do not faint when challenged. I will therefore adjust my tongue. If you remain as steady as your garden, I will be your ally. Not your friend, I do not confuse roles, but your ally, which in this place is the more durable thing." Amélie let the words stand a moment, then answered them in the language Vauret spoke best, acts arranged into form. "I accept your allyship," she said, "and I bring you this." She held out a small stem. Night-blooming jasmine, cut with a clean pinch, wrapped in a damp scrap so that it would not faint in the day. For truth that blooms where eyes are few. Madame de Vauret took it with fingers that had too often touched only fabric and paper. She lifted it nearer to her face than she would have last week. She inhaled. Something softened where no one could see. She nodded once and left with an economy of movement that had nothing to do with retreat and everything to do with economy. Letters went to Saint Celeste, not apologies but explanations, accompanied by a purse that would repair the roof of the West Dormitory and replace a set of books the novices had been sharing past the point of decency. The Mother Superior responded with a note in that unornamented hand, which is its own kind of crown. She wished blessings on those who make noise for good. Henri met with those who had been guided by d'Artois' hand and found that most of them had none of the minister's hunger. They had only acquired his manners. Manners can be retaught. He spoke to them about arithmetic and lamps, and he did not shout when one of them wept because relief, like grief, takes people by surprise and embarrasses them. He let the man find his face. Then he gave him a task. The man performed it with a steadiness that did not need applause. The day chosen for the wedding came without the cushion of an endless parade. It arrived as all days do, with a sun that refuses to be commanded, and a moon that minds its own hours. The chapel was made ready with modest care. The nave did not groan under the weight of displays designed to make courtiers speak of nothing but expense. There were flowers, but they were placed where the air wanted them. Night jasmines in clay dishes along the aisle, their pale faces like small stars held at ground level. Their scent did not shout, it spoke where it stood. People came with curiosity dressed as humility. Some came with genuine humility. The king entered with the grave comfort of a man who prefers duty when it behaves, and has lately been made to behave. Brother Mathieu stood near the rail, decoding neither politics nor faces. He watched only the door and the small line of happiness that was about to cross the threshold. Henri did not wait in the sacristy, as was customary. He waited at the front with the king, because he had come to understand that hiding before vows is a backward beginning. He wore no jewels beyond what propriety required. He had asked that the tailor do away with embroidery that looked like words. He wanted the words he spoke to stand alone. When Amélie entered, the chapel adjusted to her the way the moon garden had adjusted to her hand. She had chosen a gown that remembered her place without letting it define her. Its fabric was fine but not fawning. A ribbon at her waist matched the small mark of Séricourt near her throat. Her hair was arranged to comfort those who need the sight of arrangement. A simple pin held back what would have fallen into her eyes. The locket lay where it had always lain. It did not need to be new. She walked alone for 3 steps. Then Marcel, standing near the aisle with sudden shyness in a new coat, found his courage and stepped forward as a brother might. He did not offer his arm. He offered his presence. It was enough. She touched his sleeve once, a blessing disguised as balance, and then moved on. Brother Mathieu began the words. He did not extend them with flourishes. He spoke the brief lines old as memory. the ones that ask if love will be kind when no one is watching, if duty will refrain from making itself a tyrant, if patience will remember to sit at table with joy. They answered yes with voices that did not tremble. Henry took Amélie's hands because the ritual asked it, but also because he wanted the weight of that simple contact. He felt in her fingers the same composure that had steadied a vine. He remembered his first laughter that had belonged only to himself. He remembered his first apology spoken without the cushion of an excuse. "I pledge you my words," he said, when the time came for vows and not their commentary. "I pledge you my hours. I will not place duty and love on opposite ends of a scale. I will ask them to walk together." "I accept your pledge," she said, clear as water in a glass. "I pledge you my steadiness. I will not keep truth as a private ornament. I will ask it to work with me in public." There is often a moment in weddings when the air grows too sweet and people shift because they fear it will stick to their clothes. That moment did not come. The sweetness stayed where it belonged, between the two whose mouths spoke with care. When the time for blessing ended, they did not reach at once for a kiss. They turned first to the people. Henri spoke. "The garden that taught me patience belongs to more than two," he said. "From this month forward, the moon garden will be open one night each month for any who wish to walk and breathe. The first person there will be a woman who has scrubbed floors for years without once being asked what she sees when dawn is still asleep. The last person there will be a man who will listen." The king's mouth almost turned upward. He resisted for the sake of consistency, and then did not resist. It softened. The chapel warmed by a degree that had nothing to do with candles. They turned back to one another. He lifted her veil, which was barely a veil at all, a gesture more to reassure the traditions than to hide her. He did not hurry. He did not stage it. He looked at her, not at the crowd, looking at him. He leaned and kissed her with a care that understood two things at once, that this was his first public kiss, and that public does not mean less true. It was gentle. It corrected nothing. It announced nothing. It said, "This is ours, and because it is ours, we can share its light." The sound that rose from those who watched was not applause. It was the hum of people remembering a feeling they had put away for safety and discovering they could take it out without being robbed. When the doors opened, the courtyard received them with a breeze that had waited behind stone to serve at a proper hour. They crossed to the moon garden because that was the place that knew their first good mistake. The guards did not block the gate. They stood aside as if they had always been meant to be part of this scene. The people, some with caps, some with hats, some with hair that had never been under anything but sky, came softly along the paths. No one trampled, no one pushed. Even those who would later embellish their account of where they stood and what they saw felt for 1 hour the luxury of accuracy. Amélie walked between beds and bent once to show a child how a flower closes itself when touched too greedily. The child tried gently then and smiled because the blossom did not flee. A woman with tired shoulders lifted her face toward the scent and closed her eyes, and for the first time since her husband's death, the ache moved from the center of her chest to a place where it did not rule. Two old men who had not spoken to each other in months because of an argument about how to stack wood stood together and forgot their positioning as they watched a moth consider its own tiny adventure. Madame de Vorey appeared at the gate as one appears at the edge of a map that used to show only dragons. She wore no disdain. She wore curiosity. She stood under the arch and waited for an invitation, not because she needed one, but because she wanted to learn the taste of being asked. Amélie, seeing her, lifted a hand in welcome. The lady entered as if returning a borrowed book and paused near a bench where jasmine would open as the light left. She sat. She did not give orders. She listened to the sound of people breathing together without a script. Henri spoke with a man who had traveled 2 days to sell oranges to a court that would not have looked at him last week. He asked how the roads had treated the cart. The man told him of a broken plank near a village known for wheat cakes. Henri made a note to send a mason, and when the man laughed and said that princes always say such things, Henri asked the man's name and the name of the wheat cakes and repeated both until he could not forget them. Later, a mason would go. The plank would be fitted. The man would tell his son that an hour spent talking to a prince had fixed a wheel more surely than flattery. As the sun pulled the last of the color from the sky and made room for the moon, Brother Mathieu stood near the hedge. and thought of the ledger asleep again, not because it had been forgotten, but because it had done its work and could rest. He smiled at a novice from Saint Celeste who had come with the Mother Superior's permission to see what a promise can do when kept in public. The novice looked at the garden the way one looks at a holy place without needing saints to approve. People drifted away without being shooed. They took with them nothing but air and a story that did not require improvement. The garden resumed its older quiet. The jasmine began its nightly habit, lifting pale faces as the dark deepened, as if darkness were not a threat but an invitation. Henri and Amélie lingered. They did not need to perform now. They could reflect. They sat on the low stone bench where he had not sat the first night because he had been too busy standing to learn to be still. He rested his hand open on the stone between them. She rested hers near his, not on it, and the nearness felt like gratitude made visible. "I used to think happiness would feel like applause," he said. "It feels like breathing. It feels like bread and jasmine," she said. "And work that no longer tastes of someone else's mouth." He turned to her. "Tell me what you fear," he said. "I want to know the shape of it, not to defeat it with speeches, but to set my day against it." She considered. "I fear forgetting," she said. "Forgetting that I am a servant of the work, not of praise. Forgetting that the first gift I gave you was small and simple, and that small and simple things must not be despised when big and complicated things arrive at their door." He nodded, absorbing the lesson as if it were wind that would go on blowing whether he learned it or not. "I will help you remember," he said. "And when I forget, you will speak to me as you spoke to me the first night, without embroidery." "I will," she said. "We will be honest before we are grand." He reached for her hand then, and she placed it in his. Their fingers fit in the ordinary way fingers do when they have decided that this hand is the one they will be bridges for. They sat like that as the bell in the chapel marked the hour that houses use to tell children to sleep, and men to leave taverns and women to let the fire lower without going out. They rose together. They did not walk toward the hall of mirrors. They walked toward the chapel. One more small prayer before night, not the long one. The short one that asks for lamps to be trimmed, not flung, for hands to be faithful, for tongues to remember mercy before cleverness. They stood, said it, and stepped back into the garden that had been a cradle for more than flowers. As they reached the gate, a boy with quick feet and hair that had never yet been persuaded to lie down skidded to a respectful halt. He held out a folded note, breathless not from fear but from the importance of carrying news for people newly in love with their duty. "From the envoy," he said, as if he could not believe letters came from such places to such people. Henri opened it. The lines were short. The sums were exact. The last sentence was not arithmetic. It read, "When the first stone is laid for the hospital, do not send a minister. Send the custodian with a ribbon and a pair of hands to hold the bowl for the mortar." Amélie smiled. "I have hands," she said. "I know," he said. "I watched them teach a prince to look down." "And up," she said. "And up," he agreed. They closed the gate with the gentleness of people who do not slam doors even on good endings. The night was theirs now and tomorrow, and the many next days in which love and duty would learn to share a table without one squeezing the other out. They walked back into the palace that had decided to make room for breathing. They did not fear the rooms feared them a little and were better for it. In their chamber, which was not grand because grandeur makes rest nervous, they spoke softly of plans as if they were telling each other a bedtime story that would be true in the morning. Letters to write, names to learn, a visit to Saint Celeste to thank and to ask what is needed next. A cabinet in which Brother Mathieu's ledger would wait when not in use, not hidden, simply placed where other hands, if worthy, could find it. A lesson for children of the court, how to water without drowning, how to cut without wounding, how to stand still without becoming stone. They paused and listened to the palace, which had acquired a new sound. Relief. Relief is quiet and strong. It makes a new music under the old. It promises nothing but the chance to keep promises. Henri touched the locket once more, not as a fetish, but as a reminder of the hinge that had opened and let light out, instead of trying to trap it inside. He kissed her forehead with that same public care made private, and she answered by resting her hand against his cheek in a way that said both thank you and go on. They slept then, not because the day was finished. It never is, but because rest is a duty when one intends to be brave again tomorrow. The jasmine outside kept its watch. The moon went about its business. Somewhere in the city, a mason dreamed of the broken plank near the wheat cakes and woke knowing exactly what to bring. And when morning came, the first bell sounded in the chapel, simple, precise, without ornament, and the palace rose to a day that would be full of work and quiet joy and the ordinary courage of two people who had decided that a crown is only as useful as the hands that hold it steady while they plant something that will outlast them. Thank you so much for listening to this story all the way to the end. We hope it moved you as much as it moved us while telling it. We'd love to hear your thoughts. Leave us a comment telling us where you're listening from and what you liked the most. Rate this story from 0 to 10. What score would you give it? If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to subscribe to the channel and leave a like as a show of support. That really motivates us to keep creating and sharing more stories full of emotion and life lessons. And before we go, we want to remind you that an exciting and heartwarming story recommendation will appear on the final screen. If you'd like to enjoy it, just click on the video. Thank you once again for being here, and we'll see you in the next story.